Welcome, everybody. Hope you can throw on your headphones in order to hear me. You won't hear me otherwise. Welcome to the first session after the keynote. Obviously, everybody in here, right color headphones on, number one. My name is Shane McAllister. I'm on the developer advocacy team here at MongoDB. And this talk is all about driving customer value using API data. APIs power the experiences that we use every day, from food delivery to digital services, digital banks, and more. And for a long time, they played second fiddle to user experiences that were built upon those APIs. But that's all about to change, and we're about to make APIs a first-class citizen. This talk looks at how NatWest is looking to surface that data in meaningful ways, where MongoDB fits into the picture and the horizon they are headed towards. So for this talk, I'm joined by Jonathan Haggarty of the NatWest Group. Jonathan leads NatWest Bank's of API's technology team, and he's responsible for the bank's API platform, their open banking APIs, and leading their organization towards becoming API first and realizing their ambition to becoming the bank of APIs. At the end of Jonathan's presentation, there's going to be a QR code on the screen. Please scan that to fill in the survey. It really does help this event make it much better for you all. And at the end of the presentation, we should have a short piece of time for some questions. As you've all got the headsets on, I need to see a hand if anybody has questions, and I need to get to you with the microphone so that both the rest of the audience and Jonathan can hear you as well too. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Jonathan to the stage.
Hi everyone, it's wonderful to be here, wonderful to be back in Wapping, a place that I lived for many years. I must say it is my first silent disco talk, so this is as new for me as I imagine it is for most people in the audience. It has kind of sparked an idea that maybe inventing the Glaswegian to English translator for these sorts of events might be the next $1 million idea, so if anyone wants to collaborate on that, please let me know. I'm Jonathan Haggarty. I work at NatWest. Statistically speaking, 1 in 5 people in the room here will bank with us if you're a retail customer, or 1 in 4 if you're a small business. I've been there almost 10 years and previously at other financial services firms like UBS and Morgan Stanley. And there I lead our API technology teams. Predominantly doing 3 things: our core API platform, so how people build APIs, our open banking technology, so things that power propositions that put value into the hands of customers, and also our charge towards an API first culture and architecture, ultimately to become the bank of APIs. Today I'm going to be talking a wee bit about how we can harness some of the data in that ecosystem in order to deliver value for people at all ends of the development cycle, and indeed beyond that, i.e. the customers that use these propositions as well. Okay, I always like to soften the audience up ever so slightly before speaking, so a wee bit about me outside of work. I am a father of 3, Tom, Cora and Joe. They are 6, 4 and 3. Mongo has got me out of at least, I would say, 3 bedtimes just by speaking at this event, for which I am eternally grateful. Husband of 1, she seems to have a thing for big noses, which probably says a lot about our marriage. Cat dad to Frank, moulded in my own image. And that symbol or crest on the end is the Glasgow Children's Hospital charity, which I'm proud and privileged to sit on the board of. They're a charity that tirelessly raise funds to create both life-changing and life-saving moments for children at Glasgow Children's Hospital. A children's hospital that sees kids from Glasgow, Scotland, the UK and across the world as they come to Glasgow for world-class treatment. Just to kind of put some bounds around the domain that we're talking about in terms of APIs here. So predominantly we're talking about business-to-business APIs as opposed to business-to-customer, i.e. mobile apps. They're things like get account data, get balances, get transactions, get someone's address, understand someone's preferences. We connect to 270 unique companies as a bank, i.e. people that are trying to deliver value using our joint customer data. We have about almost 1 billion API calls a month to do that. We reach about 4 million customers. We've transacted somewhere in the region of about £5 billion worth of people's money. These are both, in my mind, quite big numbers, i.e. they were zero a few years ago. We didn't really play in this market. But equally, I think they're quite small as well. We expect to see a kind of 10x growth in this space over the coming years, so an exciting space to be. You can go and visit bankofapis.com if you want to get a wee bit more information on what those things look like. So to set the scene, where do we as a bank use data? And when I think of that question, there's a few things that come to mind. The first one probably shouldn't be problem solving. That's probably a bit of a faux pas on my part. We have the operational side of that, you know, what's failed, what's gone wrong. You know, how many payments failed, what merchants were affected, what was the total value that allow us to then go and drive next best actions. We've got a lot of analytics and insights, so things that we use to try and figure out what we're going to build, what our customers are doing, and where we should try and help them next. And we've also got a whole bunch of reporting that we do, both internally and actually across 5 regulators. We are a highly regulated industry. And you know, the important thing I guess to realise there is that means that we have things like uptime SLAs. It's important that we are there to serve our customers at all times. Downtime and problems are not good for us. Oops, sorry, I shouldn't touch this, but the notes are on it. So just to kind of set the scene, get people to travel back in time to a world pre-Mongo. This is a fairly typical architecture for how we deliver APIs in the bank. So you've got Google Apigee and their SaaS platform that we use to manage the APIs that we provide. We come into possibly the bank, let's say. We've got a microservices architecture, fairly prevalent in most companies these days. And those microservices orchestrate a number of source systems and partners to get information that we can then use to power the propositions that are asking for data. The other thing those microservices do is they take the data that they get and they pump it into useful places that we can then use to do things with that data. So Splunk, for example, great for that problem solving side of things, great for that kind of instant fix of, you know, what's happening. Cold storage, we store a lot of that information for proof reasons, for example. And then the thing on the bottom right is our enterprise data warehouse. So somewhere that we send data, it gets munged and turned into a reasonably structured format, along with lots of other data in the bank that we can then do cool things with, right? Get all sorts of insights. And we're done, right? No need for Mongo. Well, not quite is the answer to that. So I'll prefix this statement, I guess, with a statement that we have world-class data analytics capabilities at NatWest. The kind of information that we can get as a bank on the UK economy, you could write several PhDs over on. Equally, it gives us great insight into the UK economy as a whole, what's going on, how people think about their money. But, you know, it does at times feel a wee bit like the secret base inside a volcano, surrounded by fairly gnarly guards that you would see in a James Bond movie, right? It's hard to get at this stuff, unless you have skills of James Bond. Unfortunately not. Prowess of Austin Powers, again, not something that most developers tend to have. So it's very restricted. It's a bottom right problem for us. Hard to get at. When you can get at it and you can do things with it, world class. But that's where Mongo comes in. So effectively, all this data that we deal with, APIs, we're kind of privileged to start with in the fact that it is all JSON APIs. You know, we're dealing with fairly modern protocols and paradigms, which means that we can push a whole bunch of that data into Mongo. And that's where we can start to do really exciting things with it. And the two kind of spaces that we think about are applications that we can build on top of it. So things that we would like to provide over and above what we have today. But equally, we actually unlock the power of our development community across NatWest. So people can get access at this stuff, they can do things with it. We've suddenly gone from this 1% of our developers have the ability to have an impact to 95% of our developers being able to access stuff, this data, and do cool and interesting things with it. And generally speaking, developers that feel in control of their own destiny, they tend to be happier, they tend to be more productive. So there's a lot of technical benefits for us adopting Mongo, but equally there's a lot of cultural benefits as well. But it doesn't stop there. I mean, that's great for APIs that we as a bank provide. It's great to get some telemetry on those things. But actually what we see in the modern world is propositions are starting to consume APIs from multiple places, multiple institutions, to stitch a picture together that customers can benefit from, or provide a set of services to customers that they can then embed in their own websites, sales flows, and things like that. And one good example of this is a couple of applications or a couple of propositions we have called Pay It and Till. Pay It is an award-winning open banking proposition, effectively allowing customers to accept what's called account-to-account payments, a cheaper, quicker way to get money from a person that wants to buy something to a person that is selling something. And actually the architecture of that starts to look a lot more like this, which some people in the audience might recognise. You know, the world that we're moving into is one where we interact with information from everywhere. We exist on the internet, not in the data centre. So we've got NatWest proposition in the middle here, speaking to other banks, credit institutions, compare the market, all these sorts of things. They all exist on AWS, Google, Azure, etc. It speaks back to NatWest itself. So whilst we are a multi-cloud organisation, we retain an on-premise set of capabilities. Our mainframes, etc. all sit there. So we surface lots of valuable information. That all gets stitched together in the cloud, and then we serve it up into effectively merchant websites, sellers that want to allow customers to buy stuff, which is great. You know, customer problem is solved. Customer has gone from, I want to buy something, I want to do it as quickly as possible and seamlessly as possible. We can give a great proposition that allows them to do that. But actually the other thing it allows us to do is take all that data, whether it's on-prem or it's been consumed into this application, and again push it back into Mongo to create a whole other set of experiences that are really valuable for the people that are selling stuff. So we can dashboard a whole bunch of things that we can then deliver as features directly to them. So what does this information look like? Well, actually it's pretty simple really. Has lots of rich information in it, feels perhaps overly simple, but there's a lot of real value that we can drive for the merchants that are consuming these capabilities that they can then use to improve their own businesses. So, you know, transactions, who made it, how much was it for, you know, what sort of thing was it for, what sort of reference did people give, when did they make it. Same with payments, you know, very, very similar. You might have access to these things depending on the context that you operate in, i.e. we as a bank have access to a customer's accounts, therefore all the transactions on that account. But as an initiator of payments, actually we might only have the information that we facilitated through things like open banking. So what sort of things are we starting to do with this information? Well, we could do things like, what are your best sellers? So grab a bunch of transactions, pick a particular date range, the last month, the summer, year to date, my financial year. Group them by the category, so what have people been buying? I don't know, socks, train tickets, computer games, etc. Sum up the amount of people have spent on those things and then sort them. And instantly you've gone from a bunch of raw, fairly uninteresting data to real insight for customers. And this is a really simple example, but actually what we're seeing is that it's very easy and simple with Mongo to go from simple to quite complex, interesting information without having to spend a lot of time in structured kind of data stores, relational databases, trying to create ways of doing this. So some other examples there, payment bucket sizes, how much are customers willing to spend in Mass Store, generally speaking? Are they at the low end of the e-commerce spectrum, or are they high end? Therefore, should I be pushing more low-end products or more high-end products? Should I discount things if, I don't know, we find out that people tend to spend money straight after payday and then it drops off towards the end of the month? What are the best journeys for customers? Where are people completing the most payments? What about our most valuable customers? So as a business, I might want to prioritize them. So grab a bunch of payments, take some time period that you want to figure out, sort them, group them up by customer, and then do a few things. So first thing you can do is, when did that person become a customer? What was the first point in time where they actually did some business with us? How much have they spent over the course of that period of time? How many times have they actually spent something in our shop? Set an ID, and then again sort them by longevity of customer, or you could sort them by total value or something else. But again, you've instantly got this really critical MI, basically from not an awful lot of effort. You've gone from a bunch of JSON data that you were collecting anyway, through to MI that you can then surface in propositions, through things like charts, HTML5, single page applications, whatever it is you might want to do. So a wee bit about the future. I couldn't find a t-shirt that actually says I love SaaS. Definite good seller there. I would have worn it today. You saw we use Google Apogee. Google Apogee is a SaaS-based platform for us. And the way that I always describe it inside the bank is that when people develop on SaaS, they develop on Apogee. They spend 80% of their time, 90% of their time on the customer problem and nothing else. They don't talk about infrastructure, versions, scaling, all the difficult stuff that we have historically taken a lot of pride in suddenly disappear. I compare that to other API gateways we've got inside the bank, for example, where we're deploying it on our own data centers, running it, scaling in it, partitioning it, multi-tenanting it. And we probably spend about 20% of time talking about customer problems. So SaaS is a big growth area for us. We would love to move into the world of Atlas. We currently have some fairly decent patterns for hosting on AWS, etc. ourselves. But we want to move towards a world where we get all the great features that we watched various keynote speakers talk about this morning without having to worry about how we upgrade and figure that stuff out. We want flexibility. We want the ability to go from nothing to experimenting. And again, I think SaaS there plays an important part in that. No longer are you creating plans to stand things up, convincing people that you've got a good idea, and doing all the things that we've typically had to do at big organizations to get going. You just fire one up in Atlas, right? Click a button and you've got something that you can work with. We want to supercharge our developers as well. So we're excited about all the features that we can get from Mongo over and above the simple stuff. So shifting data science left to some extent, allowing more of our developers to do almost advent of code type stuff with our data. If anyone's done that, excellent thing to do. If not, advent of code, go and Google it, starts 1st of December. So dumping data out into Python, for example, and giving developers the ability to work with it natively in those sorts of languages. And then the other thing is, honestly, I'm not quite sure, but what I have found with working with Mongo is that we've unlocked an awful lot of value very quickly. There's an awful lot of power with the platform that I've not touched, I've not seen, and I'm a complete novice with, quite frankly. More of it than we know anything about, and I'm really looking forward to digging into that and understanding how it can add value for us as an organisation, our development community, but equally how we can add value for our customers by harnessing that. So I'll leave you with a few things. Happy to take some questions in 1 minute. The first is our experience with Mongo is really, at least from a feeling perspective, we feel like we've achieved 80% of the value with 20% of the work so far. I'm sure as we uncover more capabilities and more things that we can do with the platform, those numbers will shift, but it's been a very quick experience from inception to actually getting somewhere. Try and pull your data out the dungeon, so give developers the opportunity to interact with it. Mongo, again, is a great platform for making that a digitally native solution. And it's something that you can use to create happy developers, but equally happy customers. This data really helps them change the way they manage and organize their business, and we can use it to drive insights that they've just never had in the past. And if you liked any of that, we're hiring. I've stupidly put my email address on the slide, so I'll probably get spammed by the millions of people after this ends up on YouTube. I am about for the whole day. If people are around and would love to grab a coffee or a chat, then please come and find me, and I would love to do so. That's it for now. Happy to take questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Jonathan. So, do we have some questions from the room? Great. One at the front, which was easy to get to. You'll have to wait for the microphone.
Just going back to what you said about developers having access to your data, is there any features in Mongo that you're utilising to protect the customer's data, to anonymise it from a GDPR point of view? 'Cause I'm assuming you don't allow your developers just to have access to all live production data. So what are you doing to give them the access to all that data while protecting customers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we will look at how we encrypt stuff that's sensitive. So things like account numbers, sort codes. There is an element of, in production, how much access should someone have? Should you really have the ability to go and aggregate bank account data for the UK? And that's something that we take very seriously. So the honest answer is yeah, we'll use features to do that. So encrypting fields, masking fields, and we'll equally have a wee bit of structure in the organisation to solve some of that problem as well.
Excellent. Other questions in the room? Sure, 1 second.
Just getting fit.
Hi, Jonathan. 2 questions. From a procurement point of view, what led you to Mongo over some of the other options and proprietary technologies that are provided by the various cloud providers? And then a second question, from a regulatory point of view and the kind of focus that is on NatWest and other banks, is there any obstacles in your mind that you've come across to using Atlas where it's running in VPCs that aren't under your immediate control and oversight?
Yeah, okay. Glaswegian accent there as well, by the sounds of it. We could maybe collaborate on that idea I had at the start. So the first question was effectively heritage, I guess. So we have got a kind of rich heritage with Mongo outside of Atlas. We've been using it as a product at the bank for a number of years. So actually, from a kind of availability of capability, it was kind of just there. It was the obvious choice to some extent. I do think perhaps working in the API ecosystem where everything is JSON as well tends to lead us towards that, as opposed to a kind of AWS native type capability where we have to start to convert between data types and do a whole bunch of work to even get data in a way that we can use it. And then the second question, kind of regulatory environment from a bank perspective. My experience is that there are obvious barriers, but those barriers tend to be cultural. So anyone that's willing to have an above-the-line conversation, an open and honest dialogue with the right people about why we want to use this and how we can get value from it, tends to be able to overcome these things. We're not quite in the Atlas space. It's a space that we want to progress towards. But from our perspective, given we already host in cloud a lot of this data, there should really be no barriers other than kind of education, socialization, teaching people that we're not proverbial cowboys to some extent in terms of how we're using this stuff would be enough to move us towards that space. A lot of this data is semi-sensitive, so some of it can be, but equally a lot of it is already masked via anonymous IDs and things like that as well. So there's some things there that perhaps help us.
Excellent. We have a couple more minutes for some further questions. Anybody else? Sure.
Hello. I understood that you are mainly using MongoDB for your analytics capability. Any usage of MongoDB for your operational databases?
Yeah, I mean today a lot of it is analytics capability, so I guess that's the, at least from an API perspective, that's true. There's a lot of programs of work in the bank to look at how we would modernize some of our operational and customer data using this sort of technology that are at various stages of development. From an API perspective, if you're familiar with open banking, we have the concept of customer consent. So, we as a bank store the fact that you as a customer are willing to share your data with a regulated third party. Some of that information today is stored in fairly old school relational spaces, so think, IBM, DB2, etc. We're starting to look at how we might take that data and move it towards a more digitally native technology like Mongo.
Okay, still some time for some more questions from the audience. Anybody? Yes?
In the first talk today, we heard how developers have to think about different forms of data modeling. How do you train and onboard new developers at NatWest, and what APIs and languages are you using to develop your APIs?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are more and more investing in developer experience. So actually the department that I sit in is called Enterprise Engineering. Enterprise Engineering in NatWest looks to effectively raise the bar of engineering in the organisation, as well as make it an attractive and productive place for an engineer to work. So, things that we're looking at to try and create productive developers are things like Backstage.io, if you've ever heard of that. So an open source platform where you can effectively give developers a landing page on day one to come to, and then those developers can learn about how we do things at NatWest, whether that's build a UI, build a mobile app, build an API, harness data. And then the other thing we are doing at NatWest is we're trying to treat these kind of things as what we call customer journeys. So a customer journey in the retail banking world might be apply for a mortgage or open a current account, get a loan. The bank's quite good at mapping out the good and the bad with respect to those journeys. So, what are the sticky parts? What are the parts that take an awful long time? Where are the handoffs? More and more, we're trying to do that with our developer journeys. So if I have to build an API, where are the handoffs? When do I have to depend on another team? How long does it take to get access to Apigee as a tool, etc.? And then we are, using product owners to direct work to try and simplify those customer journeys, such that we can get to the point where engineers have golden pass to deliver software into production.
Excellent. We've time for one more question, if there's anything more from the audience. I have one. How long until my banking app gets sentient and doesn't allow me to buy the 5th coffee of the day?
If this, then that, mate. Go and Google it. If I've bought 4 coffees, don't buy another one.
I'm not looking forward to that. Well, listen, please give a warm thank you to Jonathan.